Finally, the new generation of MPC 3 update is out. It's a public beta and it's fantastic. Well, I thought that I would start my review video like this, motivated and pumped and high, but actually after working with MPC 3 OS in real life, I understand that there are a lot of things that need to be discussed. And moreover, you could be just like me, be forced to remake all your existing projects on the new update. Sounds crazy, right? First of all, I want to say that none of my previously existing projects can be opened on MPC 3. I mean, physically you can open them, but when you press play start, nothing happens or some crap comes out. So I think that they completely remade this whole MPC OS system, and that's why all my previous projects are messed up really heavily. And this comes to the hierarchy of tracks and programs. Now they do not have, so to say, separate programs, dedicated separate tracks. So to demonstrate, let's create a very simplistic track. First of all, we start as usual with sample edit. And I have this drum break that I usually slice, and I sliced it this time, shift convert, and we use new drum track using slices, non-destructive slice. As always, I hit OK, but now I hit cancel, because it already exists. Okay, we record it. It's a very simple sequence. Okay, this is really simple, but then we have melodic part. Again, this is sample from Splice. I also chopped it, so you press shift convert again, I already converted it, it appears at track 2. But this is basically where my problem begins, because usually I had a habit to have all my drums to the right side. So how it used to be before, we would open our empty project and there 128 MIDI tracks were already created. And as my students always said, like, I will create a new track, I said, no, they are already created. You are not creating MIDI tracks, you are choosing MIDI tracks. But here in MPC 3 point something, we really need to create tracks, because from the start we have just one. And as I said, I always preferred keeping my drums on the right, on track 4, track 8, for example, track 4 was the drums, track 8 was the percussion. So when I played live, here I had my melodies, here I had my drums, and I could play it live very simple and plain. But here I don't have this luxury, I don't have this opportunity. So in order to have my drums on track 4, I need to create 3 fake MIDI tracks so that my drum program would appear at track 4. Not really convenient, right? Of course, you can say that you can go to the arranger, do it like this, put it on track 4 this way. Yes, now it's on track 4. But guess what? I already have the melody, I have the plugin, which I don't usually have at the start, and I have some strange audio track, I don't really know what there is, so I can delete it in fact. And I would have to create one fake empty MIDI track in order to put my drums on track 4. Or maybe this is not only my problem, but the problem of other 400-ish students that study in my online school, but okay, let's keep it simple and plain. This is only my problem. Let's return to the melody, and I would keep it simple and plain, record all the slices from 1 to 16, which I usually do not do because I have like ton of slices from real vinyl records, and I never go from 1 to 16. I go like 10, 11, 11, 17, 17, 28, and so on and so forth. But now it's very, very simple. Let's record it. Okay, so far so good. But, for example, this is, so to say, a verse. Let's say that this is a verse. We can actually rename this, like verse. And now I want to have a variation of the verse. Probably I want to put, I don't know, this 16 level trick at the end or something else. Or maybe I want to play a different pattern. So what I would usually do before MPC 3.0 was something, listen closely. Before, we had a program. Let it be a melodic sample. It was a program, and all MIDI tracks could feed into this program. So one program existed, and from this program, you could have as many MIDI tracks as you wanted. And I would always say to my students that MPC is great in building a stack. Like, it's not a DAW, it's not linear, it's like this, vertical construction of tracks, not horizontal. So what I would do, I would usually mute my, for example, first track with first melodic sample. I would go to empty track 2, which I cannot do now. And I would make a new variation of the same program, of the same sample. Right here, I cannot do this. And there are a couple of workarounds that I absolutely don't like, neither first nor second. Well, first of all, as some people say on the internet, our beloved MPC experts, you can press this copy and you will have a second track of this sample. Well, if some people on the internet who call themselves MPC gurus say that this is a workaround, you can unsubscribe immediately, because guess what? This is a separate, independent program, and you see it's a double by effects. If your first track, for example, has some pattern, and let's say it's what? It's 0. Yes, pitch is 0, but for the second, I can make like -4. Let's test. The first is still 0. That means they're absolutely independent. And I don't want this, because I will create more and more and more samples. And this is stupid. Like, if you have ever worked with Logic, with Ableton or something, you understand that you combine tracks, similar tracks, to one subgroup. And this, in previous like 2.15 and all other versions, it worked like this. It was just one program, and you fed different MIDI, empty tracks that weighed nothing. You fed all these different MIDI tracks into one and the same program, and now you cannot do this. Okay, let's keep the pitch at 0, but it's extremely insane, because in mix, for example, you have 4 plugins here, 4 plugins there, and maybe like this is verse 1, verse 2. Guess what? You need verse 3 or chorus, you will make another track. Chorus 2, you make another track, and you will have 4 duplicate, individual, independent tracks of one and the same sound, which is absolute nonsense. Of course, you can say that you can create 4 duplicate tracks. Maybe you are not, worried about the fact that it's one and the same sample being copied. But then again, I remind you, maybe you are using samples from Splice, maybe you are a baby producer, but I'm not. And I usually use vinyl. And guess what? Usually it's a 5-minute long, 3-minute long track. And guess what happens if you copy 3-minute long track 4 times? What happens to your CPU? What happens to your MPC, to your workflow? Good luck figuring that out. Okay, you might say that use no effects right here, but use subgroups, and for example, you can combine 4 or 5 these individual independent programs into one subgroup, Submix, and on the first, for example, Submix, you will add all the effects needed. But guess what? What if I need 5 effects or 6? For example, EQ, compressor, stereo width, which I always use, maybe like Flavor Pro, and then I need another EQ. Usually, I would do this with subgroups. I would use 4, I would reach the limit, and to extend the limit, I would send it to subgroup and have 4 more available slots for plugins. So if I send it to subgroup and use 4 effects on subgroup now, if I use 4 effects here, I cannot send subgroup to another subgroup. Subgroup goes only into main output. So I'm restricting myself from adding 5th and 6th plugin, which I'm not satisfied with. So there is another way of mimicking our usual workflow, is making, I call them fake MIDI programs. Let me delete this track. So I have similar thing like my melodic sample, and I would say new track, MIDI. Of course, I will delete select all cut. This is empty, only drums. I go to my, it's number 5, it's empty. But then again, I go, for example, to mix settings, input output, and I say that it goes to my melodic sample. And it should play, but you have to deal with pad perform. You go to chromatic, you go to C, you need to find it. Of course, I need to move this down. Yeah, so it looks similar. What I do is I can record. Okay, so far so good. We can even rename it into, I don't know, verse 1. And if we have a look here, we can even mute this track as we would always do it, because now muting is dead. Okay, for example, I want to make a new version of this verse, for example. I create new track, MIDI. I say that this is verse 2, which is great. I can say already here that I send it to my verse program again. And what we will do. Something like this, but for demonstration purposes. I go to mute tracks, and now I can do as before. I can stack this up, do it not horizontally, but vertically. And I have like verse 1, verse 2, maybe then chorus, chorus 2. So if I play, as it was always before, like for example, this is my main verse. And then I will make the track on the fly. And then I can change to mute this and start new if I have something right there. And of course, it saves up space, because some people that would advise to just copy. This is absurd and nonsense. Yeah, this is one and the same program. Of course, you shouldn't mute this like main track that contains this program. So now what they did with the hierarchy of building up the tracks, they have program dedicated, glued to the track. Before, program could just exist and we could reach this program from different MIDI tracks. Now we cannot. Now we are dedicated to one drum program per one track. I don't like it at all. Of course, you can always go to the arranger and say that your first fake, or not fake actually, like really real program would be somewhere at the beginning, so that you don't mess up with this. It's right here. Or you can even rename this as no mute, please, never. But then again, I need to rearrange this because this is in a chaotic way right now. I can put verse 1 here, verse 2 here. Actually, let me do this real quick. Now it looks much better. So right now I will mute my second variation. Okay, and we will go to the plugin. And of course, obviously, I don't want to look at this pad perform, because this is absurd and nonsense. Like, this is a way around, this is a workaround, but this is really not the best option how to make tracks. And in this case, like, I have a sample from Splice. It's really simple and plain, but in my previous real projects, when I have like 47, 50 slices or something like this, when I go to this same mode, I go to chromatic, C natural minor, and sometimes I do not have exact location of my slices. For some reason, maybe it's a bug right now, maybe not. But for example, in my real program, I would play, let's say, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and there is a certain pattern, certain melody. But when I make this fake MIDI track and play same pads, but there are different sounds coming from there, so it's all messed up for some reason. Well, okay, let's say that this is a minor problem, like this is a bug in beta version. But this hierarchy of tracks, we have now second public beta, it's not fixed, and it's not really a good word, fixed, because in my opinion, Akai doesn't see this as a problem. But this is a really huge problem. Like, they destroyed everything. They destroyed the usual workflow. And in my opinion, when the company, and such a wonderful company, gives you something new, they mustn't destroy everything that existed before. So literally, if none of your projects can be opened, I mean, not physically, but they can be opened, but it's all messed up. Like, before recording this video, I wanted to use one of my real projects, but it took me about 2 hours to try to restore this project. I tried both options, with duplicating, with making fake MIDI tracks. I liked none of them, and I decided to go with this sample from Splice to make it very simple. Now we are in track 3. We have mini D sound. Okay, perfectly fine. Let's record some melody. But then again, if I want some variation, what I would usually do, I would mute, go to next track, select my path to this same mini D plugin, but now I can't. So I hit new track, MIDI, and what do? I, of course, say that this MIDI track, which is this track, goes to plugin 001. Now when it's sent to this plugin, I can also play some melody, but then I made a mistake, because I need to return to this real MIDI track and say select all, copy, then cut. Then I go to this new MIDI track, I insert this right here. Otherwise it will just mute itself, and I create a new track, MIDI track. The previous I would say MIDI 1, for example, and new I would say MIDI 2. Okay, and right here I want some other melody, so to say. And of course I shouldn't forget to go to mix again and say that it goes to my plugin mini D. Let's record something very different. Okay, and you cannot solo it because it's a fake track. You can solo it by muting everything else, or actually soloing this third track, which is real program. But then again, there is no sound because the other track should play those notes. So the only way to solo this is to actually mute everything else. everything else but this main program. Like, how convenient is this? Absolutely not. But this brings you to our previous workflow. How would I do this? I would do this on the fly. I would create like an intro. And so on and so forth. But this workflow, when you have to think of what track should be placed where and how to send something from fake MIDI track to real program track, that makes me feel like, you know, this Tony Stark when he appeared in this scene doing something stuff with holograms. I feel like a programmer instead of a producer. Instead of this producing workflow, creative workflow, I start thinking about some math equations. I don't know. So I don't really love it. And unfortunately, the only way that works for me is creating new sequences. So let me really quickly delete everything, or I would say I just go to track 4 and, for example, let's find my first program. So I record just the usual verse. Okay, I have this sample, then I go to my real drum program. Okay, everything is simple, but then again, the only way that I have left is to create new sequences. So for example, if I want to have a new version of my verse, I would say copy sequence to sequence 5 and let's name it sequence 5. I go to this track, I delete everything, I select all, cut, delete, and say that I want to play something differently. And the only way for me is left to just change sequences. And you might say, well, this is a very obvious decision. Well, yes, but only if you are finished with your track. How I would actually do this before? I would create a stack of samples, of melodies, of variations in one sequence. And if I open any of my existing projects, not here, of course, because I can't, but if I open any of my existing projects from the previous updates, from the previous OS, they all consist of only one sequence. Usually it's never sequence 2, 3, and something else. Usually it's just one, where I have all my variations, verse 1, verse 2, chorus, chorus 2, bridge, and something else. I just select what tracks should be muted and what tracks should be unmuted, which is genius. This workflow with MPC I've loved all my life. This I don't. And guess what? When you create a new sequence and then suddenly at the beginning of the creative process you decide that you do not like the drums. Well, guess what, my friend? You have to change the drums in all the sequences that you created. Of course, like, it's not a big deal, but you'll have to spend some substantial time going into each sequence and changing some kick or snare or everything. And this is really a workflow killer. While before, when you stayed in one sequence, if you decide that you do not like the snare, for example, and you change it, and when you change it in one sequence, it changes in one sequence. But the fact that you stay in one sequence and make the whole track, you don't need to go to any new sequences changing everything else. Such a brilliant workflow. Why, Akai? Why did they ruin everything with this new thing? And of course, like, arranger mode, it really pisses me off. Not the fact that they have arranger mode. This is great. This is really great. But I think the company, Akai, they listened too much to those people, those crazy heads that said, we want Ableton in the box. We want Logic in the box. We want a DAW in the box. And they screamed so loudly. I actually was afraid that this would happen one day, that they would bring us a DAW in a box. It used to be an instrument, a very powerful and creative and quick instrument. Now it's a slow, lagging DAW. And not actually a DAW, because with all these things, with all these, you know, here and there, it reminds me of an Android of 2012, at the dawn of Android phones. It really, HTC 2012, if you guys remember, I hated these phones, and why do they bring it here? I absolutely don't understand. Of course, like, when you have Ableton, when you have Logic on MacBook, it's a big screen. Here, it's not a big screen, and I used to love how it was. This is a very simple empty project. When I open my real project sample from vinyl, well, it is so lagging, you know, you scroll and it lags. You do something, it not freezes, but you see how it lacks more gigabytes of RAM, like 2 gigabytes of RAM. Like before, I would say that 2 gigs is more than enough. Now I say that it's not enough already, because just with this heavy update. And Arranger, well, okay, it's the same song mode, but with very beautiful facelift. I don't know. It exists, okay, perfectly fine, but don't rob us of the previous workflow, which unfortunately you did. And please, Akai, I don't know that you do not listen to customers very quickly, but I hope that in some update, when it is released, you can fix this, not actually fix, but return this structure of independent tracks, not independent, but like the whole video is about it. Like we can send all tracks to program like it was since 2017 with all these new MPC models. Since 2017 when they were released, it was so brilliant. Why did they change it? I absolutely don't know. And I absolutely don't understand why our expert bloggers are not screaming about it. Maybe they are too busy saying how everything is so amazing. Well, actually, it's not very true. And most importantly, I am #1 fan of Akai, a #1 fan of MPCs in general. And I criticize it because, as we say, we criticize what we love. And I really love Akai, because if I didn't, I would just ignore that and just walk away. But I really love this device. This is my life, so to say. This is my business. This is my hobby. This is my everything. And when I get robbed of my projects, get robbed of our workflow, I'm not really satisfied with it. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Because I have noticed this problem and I'm screaming to all of my friends, to all of my students, and I see no scream on the internet. I only see how amazing everything is. And if you want to learn more about sampling and just how to work on MPCs and other samplers, you can watch these videos right here.